Ramona Shelburne, who's back here on the show. Great stuff, Ramona.
Thanks, Rich. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So I guess answer the question: How did Kawhi pull Paul George away from OKC? At what point did he finally connect with him and get an answer that gained some traction in the process?
Well, it almost feels like the free agency was kind of like an episode of The Bachelor, right? Where you're going on multiple dates with multiple people at the same time. So what was interesting about Kawhi's free agency, which we haven't seen in a couple of years, usually lately free agents have just been kind of deciding on July 1st, and that's it. There's not really much recruitment. But in Kawhi's case, he was meeting with the Clippers on Monday night. He was meeting with the Lakers on Tuesday afternoon, about 12:30 out at the Four Seasons in Westlake. And it appears he met with Paul George on the same day he was meeting with the Lakers. And Paul lives in Los Angeles, out in the same kind of area as Westlake Village. He lives in Calabasas, out in that general area. And then on Wednesday, Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, as we all saw on the footage, he flew to Toronto and hung out there for a couple of days. And so I think what was interesting about the whole story is, like, I don't feel like I knew Kawhi. I don't feel like any of us really know him. We know him as a basketball player and how incredible he was during the playoffs for the Raptors. But personally, I guess I just didn't know he had that in him to be recruiting Paul George away from the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's one thing to like call somebody and see if he'll play with you, because that was the first hint that he was after a second star with the Clippers, is when he actually called Kevin Durant before free agency began and to ask if he'd be interested in going to the Clippers with him. And that didn't go very far because Durant was already pretty far down the road thinking he was going to go to Brooklyn with Kyrie Irving and DeAndre Jordan. But the idea that Kawhi is a recruiter, like, who knew that?
I know.
Who knew that was something that he was into? Yeah.
That's what we were saying on the show here yesterday. Is that who knew Boardman was chairman of the Boardman? And in terms of Durant and also even Jimmy Butler, I mean, they're fellow unrestricted free agents. That makes sense. Paul George is deep under contract. Yeah. And also, as I mentioned here yesterday, the model that Toronto was supposedly following, which is get the guy who you wouldn't normally think would come to your town, have him stay there for a year, let him see what it's like to be there, let him see what our organization and fan base and city's like. And Paul George did see that with Oklahoma City and stayed. And Kawhi did that in Toronto. It was the ultimate success. He wins it all there. And of all people to call and get to team up in Los Angeles, where George didn't come when he had a chance for LeBron to team up with, it's amazing. Nobody saw this thing coming. My question for you with all this, Ramona, is that as a setup, is were the Lakers really even in this? If he's thinking of teaming up with people, I mean, what was the Lakers' real shot to get Kawhi Leonard when it all comes down to it?
Yeah, so I think what's hard to tell is, people tell you things afterwards, right? During it, there wasn't a lot of reporting coming from the team, right? That was part of the whole deal in recruiting Kawhi, is that everyone was supposed to keep their mouth shut. And that if you talk too much, that was going to hurt your chances. And all three of the teams were trying to abide by that. But afterwards, you start to hear things more from Kawhi's camp and even around the league, right? So that's just the idea that the Thunder even made this trade, because let's go back to the idea that Paul George had to ask for a trade from Oklahoma City with 2 years left on his deal, and Oklahoma City had to oblige that trade request in the time that was allotted. Neither of these people had to do this, right? And there was no real incentive to doing it on Paul George's timeline, on Kawhi Leonard's timeline, except if you want to avoid creating the super team with the Lakers. That as a motivation for everyone involved, for the Clippers in giving up all those draft picks, for Oklahoma City in A, obliging Paul George's trade request, and B, doing it on that time frame. That's a real motivation, because if you really believe that Kawhi Leonard's going to go to the Lakers, which I think the teams involved did, I think they believe it, then you have to do it, because if you don't, now you have LeBron, Anthony Davis, and Kawhi Leonard with the Lakers for years to come, and you have to deal with that for years to come. And so I think that was whether it was real or not, everybody involved believed it.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you look back on it, I've subsequently heard it was very real, that he was very close to going to the Lakers, that the Clippers don't make this trade. But that's what you say afterwards. Okay, that's what people say afterwards. I think it's the only way you can evaluate what actually happened is the actions that people took. And the actions that Kawhi Leonard took were recruiting Kevin Durant and Paul George to try to come play with him with the Clippers. And his desire to play in Los Angeles, his desire to play with the Clippers had been pretty well reported and documented throughout the year. So those are actions. He actually called Kevin Durant. He actually recruited Paul George. He actually got Paul George to ask for a trade. Like, this is how you have to interpret this. And I believe that everyone involved thought he was going to go to the Lakers if he didn't.
Well, Ramona Shelburne here on the Rich Eisen Show. So the thing I'm trying to square here is that let's just say Sam Presti actually said no, right? Hey, Paul, Too bad. I mean, we're all invested here. Yeah. And if I trade you, that means I might have to raise this whole thing down to the ground, as it appears he is doing right now. And I'll get to that in a second with you. So would Kawhi, after calling everybody to try and team up with him, would he have just said, thrown all the chess pieces up in the air? You know what? I tried. Uncle Dennis and we tried. But, I'm just going to go join LeBron and Anthony Davis and their super team. He wouldn't have just gone to the Clippers or just gone back to the Raptors. I mean, based on all that you're hearing, it just strikes me as odd that he would go try all that and then just.
They're the only ones who know the answer to that, right? They're the only what I had heard was he was going to go to the Lakers, and I've heard that subsequently. I've heard that from people right before and after the trade. But the only people who can really tell you in their heart of hearts what Kawhi would have done is Kawhi and maybe his uncle, maybe his friend Jeremy Castleberry, because I'm sure they were talking about it all the time. But I think the question was Sam Presti in Oklahoma City and sort of what they had their gambit here. Okay, they didn't have to trade him in his time frame, but that was taking a risk of creating a super team in LA with the Lakers. But it was also something where they felt like they had peak leverage with the Clippers and with the Raptors, because making this trade in some ways was making a trade for Kawhi Leonard, right? It wasn't just a trade for Paul George. It was a trade for Paul George to get Kawhi Leonard. And let's say Kawhi is like, you know what? I want to be with the Clippers. We can do this trade for Paul 2 months from now. And maybe we won't have to give up as much. Maybe this new team I'm joining will be stronger. So they could have waited if Kawhi would have taken that leap, much like LeBron the year before, right? LeBron took this. It was the same kind of gambit that the Lakers had to play with LeBron, the year before. And he ended up coming on his own, and he stayed all by himself without that second star for a whole year. But what happens then is that the trade demand stands. Paul, and I don't know if Paul makes it public or not, or if his agent makes it public, but either way, you have an unhappy superstar there. With 2 years left on his deal, you can't exactly put the cap back on that bottle, right? I mean, we've seen what happens when a superstar either asks for a trade or makes it public or gets reported. I mean, I don't think that would have sat too long. I think, enough of us had an idea of what was going on behind the scenes, and whether people would confirm it or not is another thing. But at some point, somebody would have got enough to report it. I mean, I had heard it for a couple of days, but nobody would confirm or go that deep into it. And I think I don't think it would have sat. I think it would have got reported, and I think it then puts the Thunder season in peril and actually kind of kills their leverage. Like, once the trade demand is public, in some ways it hurts your leverage. And I think Sam Presti looked at it and said, this is not what we wanted to do. This group probably had another year left in it. But if it's going to go this way, you better get ahead of it and get as much as you can. And I think they thought this was the most they could get with that leverage of free agency approaching.
So then the last two involves Sam Presti in Oklahoma City and the moves here. Number one, Woj, your colleague Woj, saying that, let me get the wording right, Russell Westbrook is welcoming to idea of Sam Presti engineering a trade that
Yeah.
would bring an end to his illustrious 11-year Thunder career. So under the concept of what you just mentioned with Paul George, it's out there now. I mean, is there any turning back? What happens with Westbrook here, Ramona?
Yeah, there's turning back. I mean, shoot, like we've been talking about Chris Paul for a couple of months now, right? And then whether he's going to get traded and whether he would welcome a trade and where he might want to play if he were to be traded. I mean, this, nothing. I think with Westbrook, the wording there is delicate, and I've been involved in writing stories like that where you really choose your words carefully because what, of course, the avoidance is, he hasn't. I can't say this because this is Woj's story. Okay, I don't know. But the question is he welcoming to a trade? Is that the same as asking for a trade? I don't think. We're in the same ballpark, right? Maybe, but in some ways, it actually matters. It matters a lot whether you're asking for a trade or you're welcoming to a trade, right? And most people, sometimes you just kind of throw out Westbrook trade, blah, blah, blah. You forget all those words that are so carefully chosen by whoever wrote the story. But I think that matters because I don't know that they trade him. I know that it's always better to, once something's out in the open and uncomfortable, it's usually better to move on as quickly as possible. But Westbrook is a foundational piece in Oklahoma. You don't get a chance to, you don't get a player like that very often. And if you have to trade that player, or if you feel like you have to trade that player, you better do it right. And it's a tricky contract to trade. I mean, he's not exactly at his peak value. He's not coming off a banner season. He looks like a guy whose athleticism was starting to wane, whose flaws as a player look worse with age. There's an argument to be made that they should just bring him back and run it back for the first 20 games of this year and let him rebuild his value, and then see where they end up. But so as much as they would be nice to have a resolution, I'm sure just for the comfort factor of everyone involved. I don't think you rush that unless you feel really good about it.
All right, and the last one for you, certainly since you have been on the inside of how, as you mentioned, Kawhi pulled Paul George away from Oklahoma City. When all the dust settles and Clay Bennett, the chairman of the team, and Sam Presti, and they look at each other and say, well, what the hell happened? Do they demand the league look into some sort of tampering of something? Now, I'm not accusing the Clippers of anything. They might just be following up on what Kawhi wants, but Paul George was just seemingly sitting there happy before the phone rang. And the question is what do the Thunder do? Do they have any recourse on any of this?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's a larger conversation to have, for the league to have. And the owners are in Las Vegas right now talking about stuff like this, right now at the Board of Governors meetings. But this is a new trend where it's almost like your contract doesn't matter. Like however many years you have left on your deal, like as soon as you get, if you're tired of your team, if you want to go someplace else, players just ask for a trade. And the league has historically fined players for doing that publicly, or at least admitting to it publicly. But Anthony Davis and his agent got fined $50,000. That's not stopping anybody. Okay. And I think the notion of players recruiting each other has gotten louder, but I think that's kind of always been done. The league has a problem in the sense that this is very destabilizing to all franchises. When superstar players ask for trades, sort of kill your leverage. They're doing it on their terms, not yours. But the reason why it's so destabilizing is because the NBA has artificially created an environment where it makes it so much harder to get a superstar of that caliber, right? Like it makes it it's that much more damaging because we don't have true free agency. We have a system that's engineered to get players to stay right where they are. And I think when you either go all one way or all another. And I think we might have to go the other direction. We might have to have a true free market so that if you lose a star, you can get one again soon afterwards. It's not as hard to get one because now it's becoming so commonplace for players to just leave.
Ramona, thanks again. Let's get you in studio at some point, okay? I know I've always been pounding that table. Chat soon. That's Ramona Shelburne of ESPN.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download the Rich Eisen Show app.